Tommaso.
I think we asked for it to present standing at the stage, right?
Ciao Tommaso. Can you hear me? Yes, very good. Okay, we are about to start. So if you can join the table. Tommaso, grazie. Thank you for connecting from the airport. We look forward to seeing you. When do you arrive? What time do you arrive? Okay. So if you have time to join us for the aperitif, of course you're welcome.
Try to translate il bicchiere della staffa. I don't know how to do it.
Stuff drink.
Okay, welcome back everyone, and thank you for being here this late in the day. I am Van Aertman. I'm one of the members of the scientific committee for the Young Talent Competition Award, and I'd like to express my thanks and congratulations to Lear for coming up with this initiative to showcase the research of young scholars and establishing an award for this. I think it's really valuable, and we don't have enough of these in academia. So how this session will run today is that each of the jury members will introduce one of our three finalists. So we as the jury members, I'm not going to take time to introduce the members in the interest of time. And in addition to whom you see on the stage, on the screen, we also have Professor Joe Harrington from Pennsylvania, who is a member of the committee who can't be here with us today. So those of us who are here, except for myself, will introduce each of the candidates who will take the three finalists, who will take around 15 minutes to present their research project to us. And at the end of their presentations, I will receive the golden envelope with the name of the winner. So none of us here knows who the winner is. Only Paolo has that privileged information. And that's how we will run this session. So we'll start with Michele, and please, if you could introduce our first candidate.
Thank you, Pinar, for this kind introduction, and also a big thank you to Paolo Bucci-Rossi and to all the organization of this beautiful event in Rome. I'm really pleased to be part of this scientific committee since the very beginning. Also thank also my colleagues who, during this last part of the year, have the privilege of reading and studying this proposal. I have now the chance to introduce you the work of Alina Odzegova. She's a four-year PhD student at Norwegian School of Economics. Alina is here. I think it's a very, very fascinating work she's going to present us. The title is very effective. It's Breaking Barriers, Investigating the Effect of Restrictive Covenants on Entry Deterrence in Retail Sector. As you can imagine, it is a very classical issue, a classical topic. We as lawyers investigated this kind of covenants and restriction to freedom of commerce since the very first stages of our law school. You know, it's a very classical topic, but in studying this from the competition law perspective, from the antitrust perspective, in a digital world, it's very, very fascinating. One of the key elements of her study is the geographic scope also of the study, because she is focusing on the Norwegian market, but she will go more in detail on this. And I think it's a very interesting topic also because give us a very solid effort, a very solid sense of the trade, because one of her statements is very clear and says people need to travel to make their consumer choice. So the physical element that she can explain better than me and permeates his study, I think is very important to be reminded in, again, digital trade and in a globalized pattern of trade flows. So, Alina, the time is for you, and thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you everyone for being here. So my name is Alina Ozhgova, and I'm a PhD student at the Norwegian School of Economics. Yeah. Well, I'll try to stay here because I would like to move a bit. And yeah, okay. So today I'm going to talk about how multi-store firms strategically create barriers to deter entry of their competitors. So for a multi-store firm, such as supermarkets or restaurants where the consumer has to travel to consume a good or a service, location is an important factor that determines the demand, right? So choice of location is a strategic and a forward-looking decision for a multi-store retailer. And to secure attractive locations and protect local market power, multi-store firms use various ways. Some of them are more straightforward, some of them are less obvious. So in 90s, Sutton showed that some supermarkets in the US tend to overinvest into the development of distribution systems. And they do that to create entry threats for their competitors, to crowd out competitors from the market. There is empirical evidence about that some supermarkets and restaurants in the US tend to preemptively enter markets. They do that to secure locations first before their competitors come and take these places. And so usually these entries are inefficient in the long run, and they do it just to create or secure local market power. Another way to secure attractive location is to use an exclusive contract. So exclusive contract is a common tactic when, for example, in Israel, hamburger restaurants and shopping malls had a contract so that hamburger restaurants wanted to secure the specific location from entry of their competitors. And so today I'm going to talk about a less explored way to secure a location. This, in some sense, similar to exclusive contract, and it's called a restrictive covenant. So restrictive covenant is a clause or a condition that is usually registered in a contract against a property or land that imposes certain limitations or restrictions on how this land or property can be used. So imagine that supermarket chain has 2 stores in a neighborhood, and then it decides to close one of its stores. So it closes the store and it sells the property. When it sells the property, it can negotiate with the buyer that this property cannot be used for any other business that would compete with its existing store. So this kind of clause would be called restrictive covenant. In many countries, grocery retailers have been accused of using restrictive covenants to restrict retail competition. So covenants have been in practice in the UK and in Australia, and as far as I know, now they're banned in these countries. Then there is empirical evidence that supermarket chains in the US also use these covenants in lease agreements. And these days, there are open investigations on this topic in Norway and New Zealand. The discussions about usage of restrictive covenants to restrict competition often pop up in the media. So here is an article about the role of these restrictive covenants to create food deserts. So food deserts, these are neighborhoods in the US where consumers do not have or have limited access to healthy and affordable food. Here is another article about usage of these covenants in New Zealand. This is an article about the ban of these covenants in Australia. And so lately, the Norwegian Competition Authority has discovered that grocery chains may have used these covenants to deter entry of their competitors. And so nobody has attempted to actually quantify the detrimental effect of these covenants. So in this paper, I'm going to study the role of these covenants in competition and market dynamics, and then the welfare effects for consumers and different players. Here I focus on the Norwegian grocery market. Norwegian grocery market is quite concentrated. There are 4 large retailers that control over 99% of the market. In Norway, there is a very strict land use policy, which means that there is usually very few available slots in the space that are available for entry of a retailer. Next, Norwegian geography is quite peculiar. Lots of fjords and mountains make traveling very costly for both consumers and firms. And therefore, there are many remote markets, and competition is very local. And as I mentioned, there is an open investigation in Norway about usage of these covenants by grocery chains. So I'm going to use multiple data here, but these are the most important data sources. So the first one is geocoded store-level panel data provided by Geodata. Here I observe revenue for each store, then the entry date, the location of the store. This data set covers the period for 11 years, and it covers the entire grocery market. The second data set is unique data that were provided by the Norwegian Competition Authority. So in total, there are 27,000 covenants registered in Norway. And here in this study, I'm going to focus on Bergen. Bergen is the second largest city in Norway. And in Bergen, there are more than 1,500 locations with registered covenants that were potentially strategically issued by retailers or other affiliated companies. So ideally, for each covenant, I know the location of the property, the covenant owner, so what company issued the covenant, the property owner, and the date when the covenant was issued. Finally, I know the exact wording of the clause as it appears in the contracts. For example, ban on grocery trade, or ban on grocery trade or any other related business that is in competition with this particular chain. So this is a map. Here I'm showing the map for Bergen, for the city center of Bergen. So these colored dots, these are locations of grocery stores. And the red crosses, these are locations of properties with registered covenants. So we see that there are many slots in the city center that are now banned for the entry of the grocery chain. So in this paper, I'm going to quantify the role of these strategically issued covenants on market dynamics. And here I see 2 main empirical challenges. The first challenge is that we need to reveal, among all covenants what we know, we need to reveal those that were strategically issued by grocery chains to deter entry of their competitors. For that, I used textual analysis based on the wording of the clause in the contract, based on the covenant owner and the owner of the property. Quite often, covenant is issued by some other company, not by the retail group itself. And they hide this information because it could be damaging for the company's reputation. So here we need to dig a bit deeper and find out whether the company that issued the covenant is somehow related to one of those grocery stores. The next challenge here is to estimate the effect of covenants on market dynamics and consumer welfare. So for that, I need to simulate an alternative equilibrium and for that I need a structural entry model. So here is a sketch of my model. On the demand side, I have spatially heterogeneous consumers. So consumers are spread out in space, and they decide where to do their groceries depending on the place where they live and the choice set of stores that they have in their vicinity. This demand model is based on the approach by Alex and Grika Hostinov. And here, basically, I want to find out the trade-off that consumers make about the distance to stores and store characteristics, including price. In the static supply model, firms compete by prices, so they play in arbitrage prices. And the key parameter to estimate here is marginal costs of running stores. And the final component here is a dynamic entry model based on the paper Aguirre, Gabiria, and Vicentini. Here we have 3 strategic players, finite set of locations, finite and then discrete time, and then in each period only one firm has a right to move, and when the firm has a right to move, it decides whether it wants to open a store in one of those available locations, or to issue a covenant, or do nothing. Then each chain maximizes its expected discounted profit over all stores. Firms play Markov perfect equilibrium, so they optimally choose either a location for an entry or a location for issuing a covenant. And key parameters here to estimate is the cost of issuing a covenant and the entry cost of opening a new store. Then I used this estimated structure to run a counterfactual scenario. So basically, we want to ban these restrictive covenants so that all locations with covenants are now available for entry, and see how it affects on market outcomes. So first, we want to see the effect on entry decisions and location choice. This would allow me to simulate an alternative market structure and alternative equilibrium prices. Ultimately, it allows me to simulate new consumer choices of stores. And then in the end, I want to estimate the effect on the consumer surplus, firm's profits, and total welfare. So this is work in progress, but as I can see it now, this paper might have 2 important contributions. The first one is to the literature on dynamic games of strategic interaction, and second, to the literature and policy debate about strategic entry barriers in the retail industry. Yes, so I'll stop here, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Elina. I will now turn to Professor Valetti, if he's with us. Thank you. Tommaso, if you could please introduce for us the second candidate and the paper, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. So the second shortlisted person is Robin Mamrak. Robin is a doctoral student at the University of Munich. The title of his research project is Antitrust and Foreign Innovation, Evidence from the Xerox Case. In general, this is an ambitious proposal on a topic which is very dear to me, which is looking, as the title suggests, at the impact of antitrust enforcement of innovation, which is something that we fall short of doing as a main thing in cases because we think that innovation is very hard to deal with, which is true due to the uncertainty, etc. But what economists have been doing in recent years is to try to tackle this issue from past cases, which is informing us on the way we may want to think about antitrust policy going forward. So there's prior work which has been done on the Bell system that comes in the US. There's the work of Cunningham and authors on the pharmaceutical. And now Robin wants to contribute by looking at Xerox, so photocopying machine in the 70s. Xerox was a very large dominant company, and there was an antitrust monopolization case brought by the FTC against that company half a century ago. So, very interesting project, and I will let Robin introduce his own agenda. Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's wait for the slides. Does this work? Perfect. Let me see. All right, perfect. So thanks a lot to Tommaso for this very kind introduction, and thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks for inviting me to present my paper with the title Antitrust and Foreign Innovation, Evidence from the Xerox Case. So in recent years, I can't move forward, sorry. Is there perfect. Let me see if it works now. Yes. So in recent years, there's been quite some debate about antitrust enforcement against dominant companies. And as you can see in these 2 newspaper articles from the Wall Street Journal, particularly in the United States, there have been concerns that stricter antitrust policy could possibly undermine the American dominance of the high technology sector, as it could particularly help foreign competitors to catch up in terms of technology. Now, this is an important policy concern because innovation and consumer welfare are key drivers of consumer welfare, particularly in the high-tech sector. And so in this paper and in this project, I want to contribute to this ongoing debate by addressing the question of how antitrust enforcement against IP-based monopolies affects innovation by domestic and foreign firms. And I argue that this is an important question because in general, and as Tommaso had already mentioned, there's relatively limited empirical evidence about which antitrust measures are effective under which circumstances. And so here I focus on the specific case of what I call IP-based monopolies. So essentially dominant incumbents that derive their market power from the use or possibly the abuse of intellectual property, such as patents. Now, clearly, as you all know, patents generally give its owner the legal right to exclude others from using the patented invention. However, there's also this inherent conflict between patent protection and antitrust laws. And so in practice, there can sometimes be like a gray zone between legal use of IP and illegal exclusionary conduct. And so specifically in this project, I studied the antitrust case against Xerox Corporation in the 1970s, which involved compulsory licensing of Xerox's patents as the key remedy. And so I will analyze how this affected subsequent innovation in the industry, where I will mainly focus on innovation by firms other than Xerox, but I will also address the effect on Xerox itself towards the very end. So let me start or move on by telling you a bit more about the historical background on Xerox and this antitrust case. So essentially, the success story of Xerox started in the 1940s when Xerox started to develop and commercialize a novel photocopying technology that's called xerography, and that's still used today and still today forms the basis of the technology used in copiers and laser printers. Nevertheless, translating this into a marketable product took quite a while, and so Xerox achieved its main breakthrough only in 1959 with the release of the Xerox 914 office copier, which is this machine, and which became an immediate commercial success in the United States, such that later on Fortune magazine referred to this, well, back in the 80s, as the most successful product ever marketed in America, measured by return on investment. Now, why was the 914 so successful? Essentially, there are two key points that explain why Xerox had a monopoly in the copier market throughout the 1960s. The first point is that the 914 was the first of what is called a plain paper copier. And as this name already suggests, this new technology did not require any specially treated paper, and so all of a sudden it made copying much easier, faster, and cheaper. And then the second key point is that Xerox had protected this technology through more than 2,000 patents, and it strictly refused to grant licenses to any competitors. And so Xerox became the only seller of such plain paper copiers throughout the 1960s. Then in 1972, after more than a decade of Xerox's dominance, the Federal Trade Commission filed an antitrust complaint that charged Xerox with illegal monopolization of the copier market in violation of the Federal Trade Commission Act. And in particular, the FTC blamed Xerox for strategically abusing its patent portfolio in order to block entry of competitors. And so the case was settled a few years later in 1975 by consent decree, and the key remedy was compulsory licensing of all of Xerox's copier technology patents. And importantly, this licensing also applied to all foreign patents held by Xerox or its subsidiaries. And so in the paper, I want to basically estimate the effect of this antitrust intervention on innovation. Now, to measure innovation, I use patent applications, as this is commonly done in the literature. And in my main approach, I basically take an approach at the level of a technology class. And essentially, the key idea is to compare patenting across technology classes with differential exposure to this antitrust measure, so to compulsory licensing of Xerox's patents within the same higher order technology class. So what I do is to construct a panel on the level of a 6-digit technology subclass based on the cooperative patent classification, such that the sample ultimately includes 2,210 such 6-digit subclasses that are part of 141 4-digit classes. And now out of these subclasses, so out of the observations in the sample, 313 contain at least one compulsory licensed Xerox patent, such that these are treated to some degree. Now, before moving to the sort of the main estimation or the main regression model, let me show you this plot, which I think illustrates the motivation behind my approach in some more detail. So basically, what you can see here is the average number of patent applications separately for 4 different groups. So this is the average number of patents per 6-digit CPC subclass. And first of all, what you see is, by looking at the blue line, is that patenting in all those technologies without any compulsorily licensed Xerox patents was essentially flat throughout the relevant period. In contrast, you can see in red by these 3 lines that there was sort of a relative increase in patenting in those technologies where Xerox patents became available for licensing to competitors, and this increase was more pronounced in those technologies with a greater exposure to this antitrust intervention. And then ultimately, this sort of really captures the key idea that underlies my main regression model. It's maybe a bit technical for the legal audience, but I think still it should be very easy to understand the gist behind it. So essentially, I estimate this regression model where the outcome variable is the number of patent applications in a given subclass, class, and year. So these are patents filed at the USPTO, and here I exclude all patents filed by Xerox and its subsidiaries, so I really look at innovation by firms other than Xerox. And the main treatment variable in this model is the share, so this is denoted share S, and reflects the share of unexpired patents in a given subclass that were subject to compulsory licensing. And so the goal is to compare across these technology classes, however, within the same 4-digit class, how patenting evolved in these in classes with differential exposure to the antitrust intervention. And so I can show you the first key result that I find, which is basically represented by this figure, which shows the event study estimates corresponding to this regression model, where here you basically see that after 1975, there was this disproportionate increase in patenting in those technologies where a larger share of patents became available for licensing to competitors. Now, to sort of give this a number, I can show you the regression estimates, where essentially this first estimate that you see here in column 1 tells us that 1 percentage point higher share of licensable patents in a given subclass is associated with 0.19 additional patents in that class per year after 1975. Now that's a bit complicated to understand, and so I can tell you that overall this translates to around 160 additional patents per year after this antitrust intervention. Now this is the first key result. Now the second key result is shown in the remainder of this table, where now I split the outcome variable, so the number of patent applications, by the applicant country. And first of all, in column 2, what you can see is that if we only look at patents filed by US applicants, then essentially there was no significant increase in patenting. Whereas it turns out, looking at column 3 and on the remainder of the table, that this entire increase is driven by non-US applicants. And columns 4 and 5 show that the main driving force behind this increase were patents filed by Japanese patent applicants. Now, here are 2 additional results that I think are sort of important to understand what these estimates really show. So first of all, I find that this increase in innovation is driven by patents that either directly or indirectly cited a compulsorily licensed Xerox patent. And so this tells us that this does not reflect any phenomenon that's completely unrelated to the Xerox case. And then using a different approach, I can also show that there was an increase in the number of forward citations received by these licensed Xerox patents. And so basically this tells us that other firms used these patents for follow-on innovation. Now, the question that I want to address sort of in the remainder of the presentation, the remainder of the paper is, well, which type of firms actually benefited from gaining access to Xerox's technology? And here, first of all, or here basically what I will do is to show you a few of these plots where I split the number of patent applications by different types of applicants. And first of all, what you can see here now in this figure is that it's established firms, so relatively large firms that benefited, that increased their patenting, whereas there was essentially no effect on younger and small patentees. And again, it turns out that it's mainly the Japanese established firms that increased their patenting. Now, one interesting question is also, well, were these firms that basically could compete with Xerox in the copier market, or would they maybe use the technology to build products for other markets? And to address this point, I constructed the measure of closeness to Xerox for all the firms in the sample based on the firm's prior patenting experience. And what we see here is that those the firms that increased their innovation after 1975 were firms with a high degree of closeness to Xerox, so with extensive prior patenting experience in copier-related technologies. Whereas and again, it turns out that these are mainly Japanese firms with a high degree of prior experience. Whereas what is actually quite reassuring, the last estimate down here basically tells us that this is not an overall Japan effect, so it's not an overall increase in Japanese patenting that I'm capturing, but rather something that's specific to those firms with experience in copiers. Now, reassuringly, these baseline findings, they're also consistent with narrative evidence about Japanese entry into the copier market. So here's just a quote from Frederick Scherer, the former FTC chief economist, who observed that within a few years after the consent decree, Japanese firms such as Canon, Toshiba, Sharp, Panasonic, Konica, and Minolta, so basically firms that we all know still today, had achieved significant inroads into the US market with copying machines that were more reliable and lower priced than those of Xerox. So now let me try to sort of address the question, well, what's the reason for this heterogeneity across countries? So in other words, what did these Japanese entrants do differently? So why did they benefit from access to Xerox's technology, whereas the American firms did not? And to address this, let me sort of show you these two newspaper ads from 1980, which I think are sort of illustrative about the fact that entrants from both countries, so here Kodak for the US and Minolta from Japan as an example, that entrants from these countries started producing different types of copiers. And in particular, what we can see is that the Japanese entrants, so here Minolta, they started focusing on these small, lower volume desktop copiers. And essentially, this is a type of copier that did not really previously exist. So plain paper copier that did not really previously exist in the market. And so this distinct business model essentially allowed the Japanese firms to open up an entirely new market segment at the lower end of the copier market by targeting smaller firms or even private users. And so I would argue, based on this historic evidence, that the most likely mechanism behind this result is the higher degree of product differentiation relative to existing products among the Japanese firms. Now, unfortunately, and this is where the project is still very much work in progress, sort of testing this hypothesis empirically is pretty challenging. And so far, I have these two pieces of, I think, descriptive evidence that are consistent with this narrative. So first of all, I find that Japanese patents also more frequently contain words in their title or abstract that can be associated with smaller copiers. And then I also find that there was an increase in the diversity of innovation among the Japanese firms. So now in the last 2 minutes, let me also briefly address, if I have them, yes? Yes, perfect. So in the last 2 minutes, let me briefly address also the effect on Xerox itself. So everything that I've told you so far was about how other firms reacted to compulsory licensing of Xerox's patents. Now, regarding the effect on Xerox itself, I constructed a synthetic control group for Xerox based on Xerox's annual patenting until 1972. And so here you see patenting of Xerox and this sort of synthetic Xerox. And, well, the first thing that you notice, of course, is this sort of strange increase in Xerox's patenting right in 1972. Also there, I'm still investigating what may explain this. But even ignoring this period, 72 to 75 for the moment, one of the takeaways from this figure is that Xerox may have reduced its patenting after 1975. But the figure shows that Xerox, on average, only filed around 20 to 30 patents less per year on average after 1975. And so this is a much smaller decline than the increase in patenting by all other firms that I've talked about previously. And so with that, let me briefly wrap up. So essentially, the paper shows that the antitrust case against Xerox promoted innovation in the copier industry. And basically, this shows, also contributing to the literature, that compulsory licensing can be an effective antitrust remedy to increase innovation in the target industry if it removes the main barrier to entry, so patents in this case. And then the second key result is that this positive effect was primarily driven by Japanese Japanese competitors. So this relates to the debates that I've mentioned initially, and essentially it tells us that in this specific case, US antitrust intervention primarily allowed foreign competitors to build on Xerox's technology. However, as I also tried to show, or I'm still trying to investigate this more, this is likely not due to some of the competitors being foreigners or Japanese, but rather the Japanese entrants used a different business model that allowed them to expand the market for copiers to the lower volume segment. And so in this way, ultimately consumers also benefited from this case through lower prices, greater product variety, and higher quality copiers. And with that, thanks a lot for your attention, and thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you, Robin, and that was perfectly timed at 15 minutes exactly. Thank you. So last but not least, I'd like to turn to Professor Kovacic, who's going to introduce for us the third finalist and her paper. Thank you.
Oriana, could you join us? I bring my own microphone. That's all right. Thanks. It's really a pleasure to participate in this segment of the Lear program. Paolo, great admiration to you for organizing this part of the program. It's delightful to be here with Tommaso, with Pinar, with Joe and Abstentia, and with Michaela to talk about these projects. If you're wondering whether young researchers can have a powerful impact on our field, there was some evidence of that yesterday. The Federal Trade Commission issued its monopolization case against Amazon. The chair of the FTC is Lena Khan. 6 years ago, she was a third-year law student at Yale Law School, writing a paper called Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, in which she laid out the philosophy and framework for re-examining practices that had been thought to be benign. 6 years later, she's helped fashion the case that will put her ideas in place. That's pretty amazing. Can you imagine her having a job interview just right in law school, where the recruiter asks the typical question, where do you see your career going in 5 years? And she said, I'm going to be the chair of the Federal Trade Commission. And I'm going to be formulating a case that's going to put this paper that I wrote into practice. Quite remarkable and astonishing. So all that these wonderful researchers are doing can have a big impact, not to be underestimated. Oriana May-Lafranc is a PhD student at Paris 2, and she has got a wonderful proposal in the tradition of the excellent research that we've heard already and has been featured at this event in the past. Deals with cartels, with the way in which cartels form and operate and succeed. I think that we've learned in looking at the literature on cartels that the relationship between cartels and prosecutors is somewhat of an arms race. Prosecutors come up with a better technique for detection and enforcement. What's striking in this history is that the cartel participants don't give up. None of them have surrendered, dropped their arms, raised their hands, and said, take us away, we're all done. They've adapted creatively, powerfully, and I think in many ways effectively to circumvent the reach of existing forms of enforcement, which suggests to competition authorities you can never be content with an existing collection of detection methods and tools. And this is a crucial theme of the motivation for the work that Oriana and her has put forward here. In particular, the assumption that leniency, though was a magnificent breakthrough, would ever be sufficient, I think has been called into question. That was unmistakably government intervention of the innovation of the highest form, but not enough. Firms keep doing it, they find new ways to do it, and a major theme of the research project is that agencies have to consider other techniques for detection, notably the use of better screening tools, and the topic of this paper is how to use machine learning to detect international cartels, and in particular to focus on, I think, a very promising area of research, which is to look at the susceptibility of sectors to cartelization based on key organizational and cultural features of the participants themselves. To look at how cartels are more likely to find in settings in which you have compatibility, in which you have understanding across firms, and to explore how organizational features of specific cartel members and the culture in which they operate, who's on the board. Interesting recent research that documents how so many cartels that are formed and operated have boards that consist of men exclusively. Do you get a different result if you change the gender mix in the governance process? And I think what is so promising about this line of research is that it directs our attention to considerations that did not necessarily receive a great deal of attention in the past, receiving more attention now. She proposes to look at organizational features, environmental features, and indeed cultural features that make individual firms more likely to cooperate with each other. And as one has those features in mind and those phenomena in mind, it gives you a better idea of how to screen for potential cartels, to take the existing tools that are now getting a greater test in the enforcement community and add to them another perspective that would be enhanced by the empirical research project that she has in mind. And I think in so many ways, it's a interesting suggestion about how an enforcement community that I think is aware of the limitation of the existing tools could do better by taking on a host of additional diagnostic tools that focus on how organizational structure, culture, and environment shape the inclination of firms to cooperate. Oriane, please, can you give us a snapshot of your work here?
Yeah. So I will try my best to be as fast as possible, I promise, so we can end this quick. So first thing first, I would like just to thank the whole team of organizers of the festival, and especially the scientific committee for giving me the opportunity to present my research work here. So just to give you a little bit of context about myself and about my research, I'm a PhD student in strategic management, and my PhD topic is actually a study of the life cycle of the cartels through the prism of the organizational proximity. So today I will be focusing specifically on the formation of the cartels. And the question I have actually been asking myself for this whole work is, can we detect cartels based on what we know on the choice of partners for an alliance? So the work has two main goals. So first, there is theoretical implications, which is to show the role of the organizational and the cultural factors in the formation of the cartels. And the second interest is to develop a universal tool which could be used by public powers in order to detect, spot cartels. So to this end, I have decided to use a machine learning method, which is here as three main advantages. So first, it's particularly suitable for classification tasks. So here to classify between cartels and non-cartels. Second, it's also a kind of model that allows us to know the respective weights of the different variables. And third, and is the most important to me, it's a method with basically no cost associated to it. So we do have researchers and scholars who are focused on the question of detection of the cartels. And as for now, we find mainly two types of articles on this topic. So first, we have talked about them just in the introduction, it's the screening methods. So the idea is to detect based on anomalies in the market, based on the price evolution, price variances, etc., if there is potential collusion on the markets. And the second kind of articles I've based myself on are ones which use machine learning just like me, but as for now, it's mainly focused on procurement, auctions, types of detections. So as you can guess, there are some limitations to these two kinds of works. And the main one to me is that the fact that all these methods, they rely on indicators which are strictly related to the companies and the markets, which means that it actually requires an in-depth knowledge of what is happening in order to know whether a situation is normal or not, and so if there is potentially collusion or not. So I've been trying to find ways of circumventing this obstacle, and I've been trying to use new indicators to feed an algorithm. So to do this, I have mobilized knowledge and theories which have been developed in strategic management, and especially in the choice of partner for alliances. So since we know that cartels are illegal and unstable by nature, this means that the trust plays a very important role, and it's necessary to have trust for cartels to thrive, but also to form in the first place. So I have identified two main vectors of trust for cartels. So first, there is the existence of cultural proximity. So indeed, culture plays an important role in the trust, And the cultural distance will affect the relationships, and conversely, we know that the cultural proximity and the compatibility play an important role in the success of international alliances. And the second vector is the homophily. So it's defined as the tendency to associate with similar others. So it's a concept whose existence has been shown and highlighted in many different settings, including for firms, and especially in the case of illegal behaviors. So based on all these considerations, I will use several indicators for the algorithm, and there are two categories for them. So first, we have the company-related variables, such as, for example, the size or the geographic location of the company. And on the other hand, we have the cultural environment-related variables, such as, for example, the language spoken or the individual preferences in the country of the company. So in order to test this method, I have created a database which is composed by international cartels which have been detected and condemned. It's based on the OECD cartel database, and it has 664 companies or lines and 114 cartels. So this is the original database, but since it's only made up of real existing cartels, we need to create some non-cartel cases or some fake cartels. The idea behind here being that we want to compare the structures and see what differs in terms of organizations for both of these structures. So in order to create this alternative database, I've been shuffling the original one using a method called permutation testing. And in our case, it's really appropriate because the pool of companies are actually companies which have been thoroughly investigated. So we are absolutely sure that the fake cartels have not existed. But in order to ensure some consistency, it's not a pure random way of shuffling the data. It's actually we associate a category for each cartel, which is based on the GICS classification. And then we shuffle by this category in order to create the fake cartels. So after all the permutations are done, we merged the cartel and the non-cartel database, and we create a dummy variable which takes the value 1 if the group of companies is a real cartel, and 0 if it's a non-cartel. So we use the following variables for our database. So we have the number of companies, we have the language proximity, the geographic proximity, the age proximity, the doing business index proximity, and then we have 3 cultural related indicators which are extracted from Hofstede's work from the 80s. So, as for the experimental setup, first we standardize the data in order to eliminate any bias. Then we separate randomly between training and a test database, which is done with a Python program. And we have 70% for the first category and 30% for the rest. And so this means that the algorithm and its accuracy will be based on the ability of the model to predict the remaining 30% of the data into cartel or non-cartel. So then I've used a random forest model, which is based on the concept of bootstrapping. So basically what it does, it randomly creates subsets of data and a subset of variable at each split of the decision. And so the method is reiterated for each bootstrap sample. And then a decision tree is created for each subsample. And then once all the trees are constructed, the results are aggregated And so the algorithm constructs a classification pattern, and this is what will be used then to predict the future inputs and their classification. So, after computing the accuracy, in my case, which are associated with different values of the parameters, we find a score to be achieved the best with 215 trees. And this is associated with an accuracy of over 75%. So in terms of interpretation, what it means is that the algorithm can predict accurately in over 75% of cases whether a group of companies is a cartel or not, based only on the organizational features that we have included in the model. And it's also interesting to take a look at the feature importance, so the table on the right. So based on the model's prediction, the language proximity is the most important factor. And then the next two with an equal importance are the geographic proximity and the proximity of the revenue, which is actually a proxy for the size of the company. And then cultural proximity indexes, they seem to play, on the other hand, a more limited role in this decision. So based on these considerations, I would like to highlight just a few points about this work. Starting with the model in itself. So it has a slight tendency toward false positives. But in our case, actually, this may not be too much of a problem, since we can think that it's better for a competition authority to flag more companies than necessary rather than miss some. It's also interesting to note that the best predictions are achieved for the GICS categories where the pool of companies is the most important. So basically what it means is that the algorithm may be very well improved by simply adding more data in the future. And this is something that could be very easily done by a research team or by a team of practitioners. I also wanted to insist on the fact that this work should be considered for what it is. It's a supplementary tool in the fight against the cartels. So it's important though, because it's beneficial to combine as many innovative techniques as possible in order to both detect existing cartels and deter the formation of future ones. And because all the indicators I have used are very easy to collect, this means that it's an almost zero-cost innovation for a competition authority. Okay.
We don't want to take part in the other show.
But this is a much better show.
They should come along to this.
Yeah, buying exclusivity, sure, good.
Sorry, but before I read the name in this envelope, I'd like to say congratulations to all three finalists on behalf of the scientific committee. We very much enjoyed reading all your projects, and I think I speak on behalf of everyone when I say that they're all very interesting, and we got no doubt that they will each lend themselves to very interesting and highly important contributions. So if your name is not in this envelope, please don't be disheartened and keep at it. And on that note, the winner of the 2023 Young Talent Competition Award is Oriana. Congratulations. Well done.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
We will have time to read the final paper.
I hope so. In a few months, I hope so.
You want to take a picture all together?
Yeah, sure.